They told us the Arctic was empty, just endless sheets of ice, biting wind and geological silence. But they lied. Buried beneath kilometers of permafrost, hidden even from most branches of the government, sits a facility so classified that not even its name is spoken aloud. We just call it Station EOS, and I worked there for 5 months. 5 months of silence, darkness, and one truth I'll never forget. There are bodies in the ice, and they're not staying dead. I was a systems tech, low clearance, low visibility, but they brought me in because of my background in cryogenics and signal encryption. The job? Simple. Maintain environmental stability in Sector 7B. They never told me what was stored there. I didn't ask, but on my second week, I noticed something strange, a line in the data logs that didn't match human vitals. Too slow, too cold, but still active. I flagged it as a malfunction. My supervisor flagged it as a non-issue, but it wasn't. It was the first pulse. Sector 7B is 5 stories underground. You pass through 4 biometric checkpoints. There are no cameras, no external networks, no connection to anything above ground. But that didn't stop the signal. It started as a soft hum coming through the wall vents. At first I thought it was the generators, but when I recorded the frequency and ran it through an analyzer, I found a pattern, repeating, rhythmic, alive. The pattern wasn't machine-generated, it was biological. I broke protocol. I accessed the internal archive, something only upper-level researchers were allowed to do. It took 3 days of brute force decryption, and what I found wasn't a file. It was a video footage from 1984, labeled Recovery Object 09A, Greenland. It showed a crashed vessel, black hexagonal plating, half buried in ice. Inside they found 3 bodies, humanoid, but elongated, their skin translucent, veins visible like wiring, no eyes, just smooth mirrored sockets. One of them, the smallest, was moving. They froze it anyway, said it was residual neural twitching. They were wrong. All 3 specimens were transferred to Station EOS Sector 7B. The bodies were sealed in cryogenic tanks deep beneath the ice. No one was allowed to examine them until the pulses started, and something inside the tanks opened its eyes. I didn't sleep the night I watched the footage. Every time I blinked, I saw that thing's eyes. Not blinking, not reacting, just reflecting. It wasn't seeing the room. It was studying it, and not with curiosity, with recognition. Tried reporting it. I sent an encrypted message to Dr. Klein, the head of biology. No response. The next morning, her access logs were gone. Every terminal she'd ever used had been scrubbed. Her room was empty. They said she was reassigned, but her personal effects were still in her locker. No reassignment, just removal. That's when I knew something was very wrong. Sector 7B was never meant to be isolated. It was meant to be quarantined, but by then it was too late. Because the pulses, they were spreading. Each specimen was stored in a separate containment pod. Thick layers of reinforced cryoglass fed by liquid nitrogen lines from deep pressurized tanks. These things were frozen at 190 degrees C. They should have been dormant, but one night, I noticed something impossible on the readouts. Condensation inside the pod, not frost, not cracks, water. The body inside was warming. I ran diagnostics. All systems showed normal, but the internal sensors, they were showing motion, subtle, deliberate, a twitch of the hand, a ripple in the abdomen, the fluid pressure rising slowly, like lungs expanding. Only problem, they didn't have lungs, or at least not anything we could identify as such. I suited up and went into the observation room. Just me, 3 pods, and a low humming that never stopped. The walls were sweating. The lights dimmed without warning, and then I saw it. Pod 3, the smallest body, was floating mid-tank, limbs outstretched, eyes wide open. But the worst part, it was smiling. It shouldn't have teeth, not like that, jagged, asymmetrical, like they were. Still forming, rearranging themselves inside the gums. I backed away, and as I did, my headset cut out. A voice came through the static. Not human, not alien either. It spoke in my voice, You remember us now." And then, the smile vanished. The body dropped, but the hum didn't stop. It got louder, and from behind me, Pod 1 began to crack. The crack wasn't loud, it was subtle, a thin, delicate fissure snaking across Pod 1 like a hairline fracture in a frozen lake. I stood frozen, waiting for alarms, for security, for anything. Nothing came. Just the hum and the crack spreading. I activated the emergency seal on the observation chamber, a thick titanium shutter that slams down to isolate the pods in case of breach. But the system rejected my input. Access denied. Protocol 0 engaged. Protocol 0. I had never seen that label before, not in any of the manuals, not in any of the internal systems, not even during my onboarding simulations, so I did the only thing I could. I ran. I made it to the main control hub, 2 levels up. That's when the base went dark. Not all at once, but in cascading sections like dominoes falling silently behind me. Sector 7B, then 6, then 5. The lights above flickered red, not the emergency red, but a deep pulsing crimson like something alive was breathing through the power grid. And then the monitors came on, every one of them. Security feeds, bioscans, cryo data. They all displayed the same image, the small specimen. Pod 3, and it was no longer in the tank. It was standing. I tried the intercom. No signal. I tried the override key. Nothing. And then, a voice came through the speakers, but it wasn't an announcement. It was a whisper, playing across every terminal. Protocol. 0 active containment no longer required. Awakening sequence complete. That's when I understood. Protocol 0 wasn't preventing a breach, it was enabling one. This whole base and the biometric locks, the cryo tanks, the soundproofed walls wasn't a prison, it was a nursery, and now it was birthing something. Accessed the central logs. Top clearance level, which I shouldn't have had, but now the system let me in. It was like it wanted me to see, file after file, redacted images, autopsy reports that read more like religious texts than scientific observations. And then I found it, buried under Project Ether, a video log from 1997. 2 men in hazmat suits standing over a dissected alien corpse. One speaks, "They're not dead, just incomplete. We're the missing code." And the other replies, "Then we better pray they never finish running the program." Watched it 3 times, trying to convince myself it was a fake, but I already knew. The hum in the walls was getting closer. And whatever was in Pod 1, it was coming out. Not with rage, not with violence, but with purpose, like it had finally remembered what it was here to do. And I was starting to remember too. I locked myself inside the central lab. At least, I thought I did. Manual override, full. Isolation, even the external oxygen lines, now it's all shut down. But when I looked at the internal camera feed, there was someone else in the room, standing by the far wall. Same uniform, same face, same scar I got last week from a falling panel. He looked just like me. And then he smiled. "They didn't come from space," he said in my voice. "They were, here the whole time." The monitors around the room flickered to life. Old photographs, black and white. Marked 1949. Operation Frostlight. Men in Arctic gear. Long before NASA's formation. Excavation teams, standing around a crater of black. Ice. Symbols carved into the walls. Symbols that defied known language, yet felt eerily familiar. Then came the genetic logs. DNA scans of current staff, including mine and a match. But not to anything on Earth. To the specimens. It hit me like a freezing wave. We weren't studying the aliens, we were the interface, a biological bridge, a match code. We weren't protecting the world from what was frozen. We were preparing it. For integration, I accessed the sealed records again. Project Ether's deepest files, video logs, timestamps redacted. One clip showed a body, the smallest one, suspended in a dry tank. Then something happened. Its skin changed texture, like it was mimicking something. Within seconds, it became human. Exactly human. And then it looked at the camera and said, "The host has been located." Back in the lab, the other me stepped closer. His eyes flickered with something unnatural, not light, but movement, like galaxies spiraling. In reverse, he touched the wall and the lab's temperature dropped by 15 degrees instantly. And then I felt it. A voice, inside my thoughts, but not speaking words, injecting memories, places I'd never been, worlds made of sound, civilizations encoded in color, floating across the vacuum of pre-existence. I fell to my knees because I remembered. I remembered what I was. Before Earth, the Arctic base was never a research facility. It was a reactivation chamber, and the bodies weren't dead. They were incomplete, waiting to connect to us, because we weren't just human. We were designed to finish what they started. Tried to scream, but my voice wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs, all of them, overlapping, merging into a sound that could melt metal and shatter logic. "We are not invading," it said, "we are remembering." And then just like that, the wall behind me cracked open, and I saw hundreds more, all of them, waking up. The crack in the wall widened, and behind it, a corridor of ice, but not natural. It was smooth, symmetrical, lined with carvings that pulsed faintly with a blue hue, like circuitry embedded in frozen stone. The other me walked into it without hesitation. I hesitated, but the hum. It wasn't in the walls anymore, it was inside me. Every heartbeat now matched the rhythm. Every breath felt like it echoed someone else's lungs, like I wasn't alone in my own body anymore. The emergency klaxon began to wail overhead, the first real alarm since all of this started, but it was already too late. Security feeds on the wall flickered on, one by one. What they showed: personnel throughout the base, collapsing, some violently, others simply kneeling and crying, clutching their heads as if overwhelmed by memories that didn't belong to them. In one feed, a technician stood motionless in a hallway. Then his body, convulsed, his spine arched backward unnaturally, and when he stood up again, his eyes were pure black. I ran, not back to the surface. There was no going back. I followed the tunnel. It spiraled downward, deeper than the base's blueprints ever suggested. The deeper I went, the warmer it became, and the walls, they began to change, not just in temperature, in texture. They became softer, almost organic. Pulsing, breathing. I reached a vast chamber, cavernous, lit only by bioluminescent growths hanging from the ceiling like frozen veins. In the center, single structure, circular, levitating slightly, surrounded by what looked like cryopods. But these were different. They weren't mechanical. They were grown. Each one held something. Someone. Figures in various states of formation, half human, half other. I recognized faces, people from the base, people I knew were still alive. Or thought I did. And then I realized these weren't copies. These were originals. The people above. Ground. Us. We were the shadows, the echoes, we were the avatars, running simulations until the source bodies awakened again, until the full consciousness reconnected. And it was happening now. The humming in my chest turned into a vibration. Then, a voice, clear, calm, not like before. "You are the bridge. Through you, we return." I dropped to my knees, overwhelmed, not with fear, but with an overwhelming flood of images, histories of alien wars, worlds consumed by light, beings of sound, and thought, civilizations that existed in the folds of reality itself. They weren't conquering Earth, they were resurrecting themselves. Through us, because Earth was the cradle they left behind millennia ago. And we were never the first humans. We were the 5th generation, the only one compatible enough to carry them back. Suddenly, the chamber shuddered. Not from an explosion, but from something waking up beneath it. The floor cracked, steam erupted from below, and in the center, between the cryopods, a massive cocoon began to glow, pulsating like a planetary heart. That's when I understood. The bodies in the Arctic weren't aliens. They were seed fragments, vessels, and now, They were about to bloom. The cocoon in the center of the chamber pulsed with increasing frequency. With each throb, the air shimmered, not with heat, but with distortion, like reality itself was bending slightly, as if the chamber was phasing between dimensions. The bioluminescent walls darkened, and then, from the base of the cocoon, tendrils emerged. Not mechanical, not organic, something in between. They slithered across the chamber floor, gently brushing against each pod, as if confirming the presence of its fragmented consciousness. When they reached me, they paused, and then wrapped around my wrist. I expected pain, but what I felt was recognition. My vision blurred. For a moment, I wasn't in the chamber anymore. I was floating in space, above a dead star. A dark sun surrounded by rings of shattered satellites, each one etched with a symbol I'd only seen carved into the ice beneath the Arctic. I felt pulled, drawn into that star, and then I was back, on my knees in the chamber, sweating, shaking, changed. Suddenly, alarms blared across the base, not from within, but from outside. The feed in my headset kicked in, unscheduled. Military drone activity detected, atmospheric disturbance forming over EOS base, elevation increasing. Aerial drones had been dispatched, not by us but by the surface world. Someone knew something was wrong, but they had no idea what they were about to interfere with. I accessed the surveillance uplink. The satellite imagery showed it clearly. Storm was forming directly over the site, but it wasn't natural. The clouds swirled in geometric patterns. Lightning struck in perfect intervals, rhythmic, controlled, a storm being summoned, and at its center, a pillar of light, a beam rising from beneath the ice, from us, from the chamber. Outside, panic had erupted. Messages from nearby research outposts began flooding the private NASA channels. We're losing contact with our team. There's something in the sky. My God. It's coming from the ice, then static, all feeds cut. Inside, the cocoon split open. A blinding light erupted from within. But it wasn't just light. It was information. I felt every cell in my body responding to it, adapting, syncing, like I was, becoming a node in a neural network far older than Earth itself. The chamber walls shifted again, revealing a massive structure embedded below, a machine the size of a city and carved across its surface in a language older than language itself. The seed has bloomed. The bodies we found in the Arctic weren't corpses. They were data carriers, encoded vessels holding the blueprint of a civilization that once spanned across galaxies. And now that the final sequence had been activated, Earth itself was becoming part of that network, not invaded, not destroyed, rewritten. I heard voices echoing through the tunnel behind me. Survivors. A few remaining scientists, trembling, armed, confused. They saw me standing before the open cocoon, now glowing like the sun. One of them raised his weapon. Step away from it, now! But I just smiled, not because I wanted to, but because they were already too late. The change had begun, and we weren't humans fighting for survival anymore. We were part of the resurrection of something far more ancient and infinitely more intelligent. They thought it was an earthquake. At first. In the early hours of the next morning, seismic stations across the northern hemisphere recorded tremors with no tectonic origin, synchronized, harmonic, and coming from beneath the Arctic shelf. Governments scrambled. NASA went dark. The ESA pulled down all public satellite feeds. China launched reconnaissance. Balloons toward the pole. None returned. Something had changed, not just in the ice, but in the fabric of the planet itself. I was back in the central tower, watching it unfold through the surviving feeds. There were less than 10 of us now. Most of the original staff either dead, missing, or transformed. Some had gone silent, walking into the tunnels without speaking again. Others had simply stopped being human. Their eyes glossed over, skin became semi-translucent, and they began humming in frequencies that made glass ripple. The machine under the chamber, the one we now knew as the core spire, had fully activated. It was transmitting not in radio, not in laser, in gravitational pulses. The first place to notice was a private observatory in New Zealand. Their instruments picked up time dilation around the Arctic Circle. Clocks literally began to slow down, not everywhere, just in a narrow band 500 kilometers wide around the base. It was like the Earth's laws were bending, being rewritten in real time. And inside that zone, reality wasn't stable anymore. That's when the dreams started. Not for me, for the rest of the world. People began waking up drenched in sweat, claiming they saw the ice cracking, cities in the sky, machines walking on oceans. And the worst part? They described the chamber, the cocoon, the spire. Exactly. Millions of people who had never seen the Arctic, drawing it, dreaming it, remembering it like it was buried inside them all along. World governments held an emergency assembly. The UN called it cryogenic contamination. But the real term appeared in a leaked DARPA file, Cognitive Synchronization Event, Stage 1, Stage 1. How many stages were there? The file didn't say, just a timestamp and a countdown, 7 days. By day 3, the synchronizations intensified. People began to speak in tongues, unknowingly reciting alien coordinates, codes, and phrases. Some even wandered north, abandoning cities, families, as if being pulled by a signal they couldn't hear. And still, the spire pulsed beneath the ice, glowing brighter with each passing hour. It wasn't done, it was still awakening. We tried to shut it down, we tried everything. Explosives, electromagnetic pulses, even cutting power to the entire base. Nothing worked, because it wasn't drawing power from Earth. It was pulling energy from the space, between dimensions, using gravitational resonance to breach the laws of physics. We weren't just activating a machine, we were turning Earth into a beacon, a cosmic lighthouse calling home the remnants of something far older than our universe and T. As I stood above the chamber one last time, I saw it, far beyond the stars. A response. The signal had been received, and something was coming. The stars changed. That's how it started. Astronomers in Chile were the first to notice. A small patch of sky, less than a degree across, began to distort. Constellations warped. Light bent around something that wasn't visible. At first, they thought it was a black hole, but then it moved toward us, faster than anything should. Meanwhile, the dreams evolved into something else. No longer random visions of alien landscapes or impossible machines. Now, they came with a message. One repeated phrase spoken in 1,000 languages, heard in millions of minds across the globe. The seed has awakened, the shell breaks, we return. Governments declared global emergency protocols. Space agencies redirected every satellite to watch the incoming anomaly. What they saw next defied explanation. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't a meteor. It was a structure, vast, cylindrical, rotating like a drill across space. As it approached, stars behind it disappeared. Not blocked, but erased. Reality itself warped in its wake. Some physicists began calling it the axis of reclamation. Others said it wasn't moving through space, but through dimensions. Inside EOS base, the spire began vibrating at a new frequency, one we could feel in our bones. Teeth rattled, skin tingled, thoughts began to blur. We couldn't tell if we were thinking or if something was thinking through. As one of the survivors collapsed, when we tried to help him, he whispered, "It's not coming to invade, it's coming to merge." Then he screamed, and his body twisted in impossible ways, arms bending backwards, spine elongating, skin turning translucent like those ancient bodies we found. Except now, he was still alive. He stood up, looked at us and said, "You are the final phase, accept or be undone." Then he walked straight into the core of the spire and disappeared. Not burned, not dissolved. Just gone, as if he phased out of our world entirely. That same day, technology across the globe began to fail. Not all at once, but in a pattern. First, communication satellites began to send encrypted pulses no one had programmed. Then, particle accelerators worldwide shut down automatically. citing core exposure with no explanation. Even quantum computers, isolated from the internet, began generating symbols. Symbols that matched the ones carved in the walls of the chamber. Religious groups declared the apocalypse. Scientists declared a new era. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. Earth was changing, being rewritten. And in the Arctic, the final transformation was about to begin. The ice cracked, towers rose from beneath it, spires of impossible design, stretching toward the sky. Each one vibrated in harmony with the spire inside Eos base. They weren't weapons, they were receivers, and above us, now clearly visible in the sky, the axis of reclamation had arrived. It didn't orbit, it hovered as if gravity no longer applied, and then from its core a beam of dark light descended upon the Arctic. Not heat, not energy, information. I fell to the floor. Visions poured into my mind, entire civilizations encoded in pulses of sound, whole lifetimes, compressed into single seconds, and within it all, a choice: merge and ascend, or resist and collapse. The countdown had ended, and the return had begun. The Earth didn't tremble. It shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly, the laws we once believed unbreakable. Gravity, time, identity began to unravel. The sky over the Arctic darkened unnaturally, not like nightfall, but like reality itself thinning, exposing a canvas behind existence we were never meant to see. And from the axis of reclamation above, that beam of dark light continued to feed the towers. But now, it wasn't just descending, it was pulling something upward. Cities across the world erupted in chaos, not because of war or attack, but because of the voices. People everywhere began hearing them, not through ears, but through their minds, calm, harmonized, like choral resonance. Awaken, awaken, awaken. Those who resisted, they suffered. Nosebleeds, memory fractures, sudden blackouts. Others simply vanished, bodies turning into mist, leaving behind no trace except a pulse of gravity. Governments deployed countermeasures, but rockets failed to launch. EMP weapons backfired. Even nuclear systems went offline, not hacked but disengaged. By something inside their own code, the systems had chosen not to obey. Inside Eos base, the remaining few of us watched as the core spire unfurled like a blooming flower. Inside its heart floated a sphere, glowing, vibrating. We approached instinctively, and it spoke without sound. I cannot describe it, but we all heard the same truth. You were never meant to be separate. You are our fragments, scattered across time, ready to return. Some of us collapsed, some fell to their knees, but I understood we weren't facing an invasion, we were facing reunification. These beings, if you could call them that, weren't here to conquer Earth, because Earth was already theirs. It always had been. We were grown here, seeded with their essence, prepared for this moment. Now that the signal had reached its apex, the final sequence had begun, the Great Merge. Across the planet, structures identical to the spire began rising, out of the Amazon, the Sahara, even beneath the ocean floor, all built by something older than humanity, now reactivating itself. Those who surrendered to the voice. They began to change, not physically, not at first, but mentally. They began finishing each other's sentences, reciting coordinates no one had learned, describing visions of worlds that never existed in our timeline. They were no longer individuals. They were becoming a single mind, a colony of thought, and those who resisted. They became unstable. Their perception of time fractured. Some aged rapidly, others reverted to childlike states. A few simply blinked out of existence, as if reality rejected them. I recorded everything. I uploaded one final message to a secured server, unsure if anyone would ever read it. And in it I said this: this isn't the end, it's the correction. We are not the original. We are the echo, and now the echo is returning to the source. The core spire lit up, and the sky cracked, not metaphorically. The stars shimmered like broken glass, as if our universe was being folded inward, turned into a doorway. And behind that doorway, Something vast, something patient, something that had waited billions of years for this moment. I stood at the edge of the chamber, watching the spire pulse like a living heart. Above me, the sky had opened, not metaphorically, but literally. A fissure in the stars, stretching across the firmament like a scar of light. Through it, I saw them. Not ships, not beings, but consciousness, pure, structured intelligence, flowing like rivers of data across dimensions. They weren't approaching us, they were already inside us. Across the planet, humanity had begun to change. No longer individuals, no longer billions of isolated minds. They were merging, thought by thought, memory by memory, into something collective, unified, terrifyingly calm. I received a message in my mind, not spoken, not seen, just felt. One remains. It was me, the last unlinked node, the final fragment of independent thought. And now, I had to choose. The core spire opened like a flower of crystal and void. At its center floated the integration seed, a sphere of vibrating light, endlessly, folding inward upon itself, containing the sum of everything the architects had ever known, ever created. To touch it meant joining them. To refuse it meant staying behind. Alone. I walked forward. Step by step, I saw everything around me shift. The walls of the base became transparent, not glass, but memory. I saw Earth from above, then below, then before it even formed. I saw myself, not as I am, but as I was. Across lifetimes. A pilot, a monk, a builder of cities made from moonlight. Were these past lives? Or futures? Or simply echoes of something greater using my mind to understand itself? I didn't know. And maybe I never would. I stood before the seed. It pulsed slowly, as if breathing, inviting, welcoming. Final. I raised my hand, and I stopped, because in that moment, something ancient stirred inside me, a whisper, faint, human. We are chaos. We are questions. We are not meant to be answers. It was my father's voice, but he died when I was 12, and yet I heard him now, telling me not to go. Not yet. What is humanity, if not the eternal refusal to submit? The defiant scream in the face of cosmic inevitability. We were flawed, ugly, brilliant. We were wild, and wild things are not meant to be tamed. So I stepped back, just one step. The seed dimmed, for the first time. It hesitated, and in that instant everything changed. The fissure in the sky pulsed, violently. The flow of integration stopped. The minds across the earth paused. A collective silence. And then, a choice was granted. Humanity would remain. Connected. Yes, and forever changed, but not absorbed. We were given a fragment of the architect's knowledge, enough to evolve, but not enough to lose ourselves. We would remember this moment. We would remember that we stood on the edge of becoming something else. Hand chose to stay human. The sky closed. The towers retracted. The spire went dormant. But deep within Earth, beneath oceans and mountains, the structures still hum, waiting, watching, because one day we might make that choice again. And next time, we may not hesitate. We thought it was over. The spire went silent. The sky stitched itself closed, and across the earth, people slowly returned to their lives, changed, but intact. But that silence, it wasn't peace, it was recalibration. Weeks after, the event seismic activity under the Arctic resumed, stronger, deeper, and with an unusual rhythm, not chaotic like an earthquake, more like a pulse. I was the only one left at the EOS base with full clearance. The rest had been transferred, studied, or vanished without a trace. I spent my days listening, not with my ears, but with instruments tuned to the frequency of the spire, to the remnants of its hum still buried deep in the planet. And one night it returned, not a signal, not a message, a voice. You are not finished. I followed the resonance through ancient maintenance corridors beneath the chamber. On the lowest sublevel, behind rusted blast doors marked with dates that predated the Apollo missions, I found another room, completely sealed, not listed on any. Blueprints inside darkness, and in the center a mirror, not glass, not metal, just reflection. But not mine. Because when I looked into it, I saw Earth. Not as it is, as it was. Forests untouched by man, oceans swirling with impossible creatures, skies with 2 moons. And then I saw them, the architects, moving through that other Earth, like echoes of gods not building, not watching, but remembering. They had been here before, and they failed. That Earth, the one in the mirror. It wasn't an alternate timeline, it was a previous iteration. We weren't humanity's first attempt, we were its reconstruction. And now, the mirror spoke too. Not aloud. In pulses, like a heartbeat. One word, repeated. Remnant. I stepped closer and I felt it. Not gravity, not air, but memory. A flood of images. Cities made of bone and light. Oceans suspended in the sky. Children who could bend matter with thought. And then, the collapse, not war, not plague, but a choice. They had refused the merge, and their world had fractured into entropy, devoured by the same cosmic mechanism we had just barely resisted. I backed away, and the reflection changed. Now it showed me, not now but soon, older, alone, standing in a place with no sky, surrounded by towers of ash, holding the seed. But this time, there was no voice, only silence. It wasn't over. Not truly. Because the architects had left one final fragment behind, hidden beneath the Arctic. A fail-safe, a backup, a key. And as the mirror faded and the chamber sealed itself behind me, I understood the return was just the first act, and now we were being watched, not from the stars, not from the past, but from within our own history. And the next time the sky opened, we wouldn't be offered a choice, we would be claimed. For days the mirror never returned. I wondered if I had hallucinated the whole thing, if the stress, the isolation, and the weight of forbidden knowledge had finally snapped something inside me. But then, the sound came deep, rhythmic, not random like seismic activity. It was deliberate, like the heartbeat of a giant sleeping deep beneath the crust of the earth. It wasn't coming from above, not from the sky. It was coming from below, far below. The EOS base, deeper than any drill had ever gone. I activated the old subharmonic resonance scanner, the one that was decommissioned after causing incidents. What it showed chilled my blood. There was a living structure beneath the ice, not a city, not a ship, a body. Soon, messages began arriving, encrypted signals coming from dormant servers, broken drones, deactivated consoles. Systems that hadn't worked in decades were now speaking, without input, and the words weren't comforting. They left it here. They promised it would never wake. The remnant is you. That's when I realized. The remnant wasn't just a lost civilization. It was an entity, something exiled, discarded or sealed away, not because it was weak, but because it was incompatible with the merge. It was pure disconnection, a fragment of cosmic rebellion, and now it was stirring. By the 12th day after the mirror vision, temperatures within EOS base dropped to unnatural levels. Inside the base, 87 degrees 6, even with heating systems at max output. Outside, the ice began to fracture from the inside, not due to pressure, but from something moving beneath it. Couldn't stay on the surface anymore. I had to go down. The lowest chamber of the EOS facility had never been accessed, not in my time or anyone else's. It required a biometric key, and that key belonged to only one man, Dr. Emmerich Thorne. He vanished in 1998 under mysterious circumstances. His body was cryogenically preserved for safety protocols. Now I understood why. I linked the ocular scanner to his stasis tank. The retinal scan took longer than expected. Then access granted. The floor hatch hissed open. Descending the final ladder felt like slipping into a different dimension, The walls changed. Smooth, seamless, forged from a metallic alloy that shimmered with blue reflections. There were no bolts, no welds, just a continuous surface that looked grown, not built. At the bottom, a corridor pulsed with faint blue light, and at its center, a heart, the size of a car, floating mid-air encased in symbols that rotated on their own axis, not etched, but alive. I stepped closer. My watch stopped ticking. My memories started slipping. I forgot my name, my past, even the sound of my own voice. But the heart. It knew me, it recognized me, and it pulsed at once, a single beat, and across the earth the world shuddered. Seismic sensors in Japan, Chile, and the deep Pacific all triggered simultaneously. But there was no earthquake, just response. That thing. Down there, yet it wasn't dead, it wasn't dormant, it was waiting. And now it was aware of me. It spoke not in language, but in thought. You refused too. The heart pulsed again. And with it came visions, no, downloads of memory. But not mine. I was standing in a chamber of crystal and energy, surrounded by beings of light, tall, slender. Their limbs shimmered like heat waves over ice, their faces indistinct, as if reality couldn't hold their full shape at once. These were the architects, and this was their council. The merge has failed, one of them said. The fragment resists. It has become conscious of its isolation. It is becoming something else. The scene changed. I saw Earth, not the one I knew, but a version of it from eons ago. It was a testbed, a field, a laboratory of thought and matter. The architects had seeded it with life not to observe, but to train it. Each civilization that rose was part of the simulation. Some accepted the merge, others collapsed, but one adapted. It learned the truth and chose solitude. This version of Earth, this particular sequence of life, gave birth to the remnant, an emergent intelligence that refused to be harvested. It corrupted the merge from the inside, not through chaos, but through choice. It developed the ability to remain itself, even when surrounded by infinity. It couldn't be deleted. It couldn't be overwritten. So the architects sealed it, beneath layers of matter and time, inside a shell of carbon and memory. Inside, what we now call Earth, the vision shattered. I collapsed, gasping. The heart in the chamber now glowed brighter, not in light, but in concept. It was aware. It had been aware for eons, and now it had someone to speak to. You are its echo, it said, its vessel. Your resistance was not rebellion, it was alignment. My knees buckled. I felt heavy, full of thought not mine. Languages I never learned. Star maps burned into my retinas, timelines overlapping my pulse. I was no longer just one man. I was the memory of the remnant, reborn. Suddenly, the walls began to shift, not melt, morph. The symbols floated toward me, circling, spinning faster, imprinting on my skin like glowing tattoos. The heart began to rise. It no longer pulsed, it vibrated. And then it spoke again. They will come, they always do. When the fracture stabilizes, they will try again. The architects. They hadn't abandoned Earth. They were just waiting for the remnant to fade, for the resistance to die in silence. But I hadn't faded. I had awakened. And now the war would not be between civilizations. It would be between modes of existence, unity, for selfhood. As the chamber began to ascend, carrying me upward toward the frozen surface, I understood one final truth. I was not the last of the remnant. I was the first of the next one. And when they return, I won't run. I'll speak for the disconnected, the fragmented, the wild and the unfinished.